Yeah, so let's just go through the news. On Wednesday night, Michigan fired Sherrone Moore for cause after 2 seasons as the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines. Now, this came a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so after some rumors were really percolating online. It was kind of like the message board level of corners of college football Twitter. And everyone wondered immediately, what could it be if the head coach is fired for cause? Well, Michigan put out a statement very quickly after the news broke with a lot of details. The statement from the athletic director, Ward Manuel, said Michigan head football coach Sherrone Moore has been terminated with cause effective immediately. Following a university investigation, credible evidence was found that Coach Moore engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. This conduct constitutes a clear violation of university policy, and Michigan maintains zero tolerance for such behavior. So we got the details very quickly that
Yeah.
there was something inappropriate happening with a staffer. I want to give just a couple more pieces of context and we get into what happened later in the evening. My pal Austin Meek over at The Athletic, I used to work very closely with him on Michigan news. He said a source briefed on the decision said the school received an anonymous tip regarding the inappropriate relationship, which prompted the investigation. The investigation did not initially produce evidence of the relationship, according to the source in The Athletic, but additional evidence came to light in the last 24 hours that led to Moore's dismissal. So we do not know, again, how much information there was and when and what changed that calculus for Michigan at this point. We're recording this Thursday, December 11th in the morning, and this has been a fast-moving story. So we apologize if some of these things are answered a little bit later by the time you listen to this. What happened later on Wednesday night was all of the sudden reports from police reporting. Sherrone Moore in custody at the Washtenaw County Jail on Wednesday night as a suspect in an alleged assault, hours after he was fired from the school. Again, my buddy Austin Meek in The Athletic, he said earlier on Wednesday, police were called to the listed address of a female Michigan football staffer at 4:10 p.m. According to the police dispatch, police sent officers to Sherrone Moore's address as well. He was detained in Saline, a few miles outside of Ann Arbor, as part of an alleged assault investigation. And then obviously he eventually went to the Washtenaw County Jail. So this is a really messy story, Joshua. It's bad. It's sad. There's a lot of layers to it. And I don't even know where to start. I would say that, one of the first things that you would think about if you are a head coach of a college football program, making a lot of money. If it were me, I would stay home. I would not interact with anyone in inappropriate ways. I would sit at home with my wife and kids, and not have bad judgment and put your career and family and life at risk like this. Like that's where my mind first goes, as we are continuing to wait more information of exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate from that perspective of it, and folks have talked about it, but you think about his wife and children in this scenario and the impact that it has on a family. You think about other people that are involved too, and how their world is now upside down as well, regardless of their level of involvement and culpability in this. Like it's a lot of unfortunate fallout that happens there. But from the perspective of Sherrone Moore, I look at him as a guy who was lucky to be the head coach at the University of Michigan. Jim Harbaugh really wanted him to have that role and that responsibility when he left to go to the Los Angeles Chargers. And so from that perspective, it's almost like you have to operate probably above and beyond what most guys would do in terms of, morals and character and how you handle that job, because if it was an open search, you wouldn't have been the guy. So that's what I immediately think about. And then we got to the end of this year. Michigan's 9-3. Sherrone Moore talked about how it fell short of their standard. And I think a lot of the reason why was because the good teams that they played, they just weren't competitive in those ball games. And folks like you and I started to ask the question, is next year the year for Sherrone Moore, right? Like, is that the one where people start to ask about his tenure and can you fire him at that point? Are you far enough away from this investigation where maybe they gave him some protection so he wouldn't, just get out of there quickly? And now you see this story, and certainly people affiliated with the University of Michigan don't like what went down, and nobody likes what went down here. But I think that there are some people like, man, we just unloaded a coach that we really didn't have a ton of faith in to be the guy for this program. And that's a really interesting piece of this where, like, I think that there are some people that just aren't sad to see him go because they were like, we need a better coach for this program.
Well, I wanted to ask you this. I mean, you have been, in college football, you have been in NFL programs and organizations. We both hear a lot of things that are happening in a lot of
Sure.
places around the country. Like, it's not abnormal that coaches would be engaging in, I would guess, extramarital relationships,
Sure.
potentially even around small college towns. Is this the sort of thing that could have potentially just been swept under the rug, like covered up? Instead of
Yes.
gone public, instead of the school putting out a statement kind of airing all the dirty laundry, if they had
I
wanted
I
to.
I would say it depends on all of the details there, but a typical we have both heard, maybe even seen some of these types of relationships. And if you're winning ball games and you're recruiting really well, that people will find a way to make sure that these things don't become public or they don't blow up and harm the university and the coach and the person that was involved on the other side of things. And that's been kind of a talking point there too. Like you would have to imagine that if they're sitting there at maybe 11-1 or even 10-2 and they just beat Ohio State and they're looking at a college football playoff bid, who knows what happens here, right? And like that's the nefarious part of this. I think there's going to be a lot of speculation. We're already seeing some of the crazy
Yeah.
speculation, but even on that portion of it, of was this something that if he was a better football coach, like they would have figured out a way that this wasn't blowing up?
There's a lot of ways to be very cynical about this and
Yeah,
the
no doubt.
timeline, because
Yes.
we don't have more information at this
Can
point.
Really quick, the timeline I think is going to be litigated by a lot of people online who aren't equipped to do it early on. And I think it's important to understand that when it comes to a personnel matter, and in particular, something that involves a an employee of high rank, somebody who works for them in a a relationship, sexual relationship, you have to be very careful about how that is investigated. You have to be very careful about the facts that you use, and especially when you're trying not to pay a guy, you have to make sure all of your ducks are in a row. And so I know that there are people who are immediately like, they waited until after he lost to Ohio State, or they waited until after they signed the class. And to your point, it's a very cynical way to look at it, because I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt, at least today, before we have all the information, that this is not a scenario where you get to jump the gun at all. You have to take your time in assessing the facts when it comes to one of these situations.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, especially when you're trying to fire someone for cause.
Right.
And avoid, I think it would be like a $12 million buyout or
Yes.
something like that for Sherrone if it were fired without cause. Yeah, there's a lot of steps and a lot of processes that have to come into play. And that's why, again, I think we need more information from Michigan.
Mhm.
They need to be more transparent about this. And about that timeline for that reason. I would still also think that the high school signees, everyone who just signed with Michigan, and the transfer, the people on the roster, everyone will have an opportunity to leave. Like, that is
Yeah.
where the NCAA has loosened their rules to make sure that people can get out of national letters of intent, which are now these aid documents, which don't kind of have the same name
Right.
and acronym, but that you can do that for a head coaching change,
Yeah.
so that you are
It's
not bound and you are not stuck.
that
But
was one of the first things real quick that I thought about was, like those guys, for me, I'd be like, all right, where am I going to go? Kerry Combs was also just hired like a few
2 days
days
ago.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Guy who, go
Sherrone
ahead.
also met with the media to discuss,
Yes.
like, to do a season wrap up. That's where, like, I think the timeline stuff, they
Yes.
genuinely were moving forward like a normal off season.
Yes, that's kind of the thing there, and I know people are like, "Oh, maybe you suspend them with pay while you're doing it," but again, like you don't. Again, if it's not, if there wasn't evidence of the relationship before, I don't think you want that thing to blow up like there's any smoke anyway, in case it didn't happen. But like I think about those guys too, where it's like Kerry Combs just dropped into Ann Arbor, and he's like, "All right, like what am I gonna do now?" So there, I mean, a lot of people are affected in a situation like this, I guess is what I'm trying to say.